Becky's Musical Podcast.
Resistance is useless!
The music world is jammed with unsung heroes. I mean, it's jammed with them. Some of these unsung heroes were members of other bands. Others were producers, session players, or hired guns who've gone on to tour with other artists because when it came to playing their music live, they chose the guys that would make their best music sound great. And some of those guys have done all those things, sometimes all at once. Jason Falkner, my guest today, is one of those guys. Jason has worked with a couple of people you may have heard about: Paul McCartney, Glenn Campbell, Robin Hitchcock, Cheap Trick, Chris Cornell, Weezer, Amy Mann, Noel Gallagher, Beck. Also recently played with Elton John at the Oscars. Jason is a multi-instrumentalist who's released a number of brilliant solo albums. Also a member of the tragically underappreciated band The Grays with John Bryan. A one-time member of the band 3 O'Clock. Produced the album Silver Lake with Thomas Walsh of Pugwash. And of course, he was also a member of one of my favorite bands of all time, Jellyfish, which is a story all by itself. Jason Falkner is a ferociously talented performer and an insanely brilliant songwriter, and I've been a huge fan since I saw him with Jellyfish open for the Black Crowes in 1991. This is my interview with the great Jason Falkner on Becky's Musical Podcast. So I guess I want to begin by just quickly getting this off my chest real quick. I own nearly everything that you have ever done, from the first Jellyfish record, Belly Button. I even own the second one that you weren't on, The Grays, right. TVI's, Logan Sanctuary, all the stuff, all the solo stuff. I can't tell you how much I spent on those albums from Japan.
Right.
All Quiet on the Noise. The Noise Floor took a little bit, and everyone says it's on was about the same as my mortgage. So I'm not telling you this to embarrass you. I'm telling you this because
I appreciate it.
I'm telling you this because I've put together an invoice and I'm sending you a bill.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I'll put that. No, I really appreciate that.
I have to say, the first time I saw you play, it was with Jellyfish, and I don't want to make this all about Jellyfish, obviously, because there's a lot to get to here. But the first time I saw you was back in 1991. You guys were opening up for the Black Crowes, and the radio station I was working for at the time was promoting the show, and everybody was there to see the Black Crowes. I may have been the only one there to see Jellyfish. I had just gotten the CD, and I thought it was terrific. But seeing you guys play it and recreate some of those songs, it didn't hit me that you guys were going to be as unbelievably great live as I expected. I was completely stunned by watching you guys play.
Well, I appreciate that. That was a well-oiled machine, that little band. I would say that we over-rehearsed, but I actually am of the belief that over-rehearsing allows you to then, it gives you a certain freedom because you know it so well, and then you're not thinking about it. I've done every conceivable type of rehearsal for these different things I've been involved in, and sometimes it's one day of rehearsal before playing 15 songs that you 5 of which you heard that week, and that's the Jellyfish situation was the polar opposite of that. We rehearsed for a long time. One of the reasons for that actually was the bass player Chris. I played most of the bass on the record, and
right.
Steve McDonald played on a couple songs, and John Patitucci played upright on a couple songs, and but other than that, it was me. So it took us ages to find a bass player for the band. Because, obviously we made the record as a 3-piece.
Right.
And then, and so part of that over-rehearsal was actually rehearsing Chris into the band and getting him sort of up to snuff as a bass player. And we took, so just sort of by nature of that, like kind of working him into the band, we there was so much rehearsal, and so I'm glad to see that it wasn't lost on.
It wasn't lost at all, because I think some of the people at the station were saying, well, here's those guys in those goofy suits, but the fact of the matter is, right, this was an insanely talented band with insanely talented songwriting. That there are two things about Jellyfish that I've been holding on to, Jason, for like the last 30 years or so. So indulge me for just a second here. One, I never understood why this band was not the biggest band in America, because it certainly had all the things you would want out of a band, other than the fact that there was grunge going on and all these other things. And the other question I have is, and this is specifically about you, how does any band with Jason Falkner not record any Jason Falkner songs?
Well, they didn't. That's why I left. That's that was the root of the problem for me. I kind of, I've said this a lot before, but I was kind of hoodwinked into the band, because I had met Roger very briefly through an ad that I had put out in a classified paper here in L.A. called The Recycler, and Roger was the only person that called my ad. And what's astounding to think of is, it's astounding that one person responded to my ad, because it said something to the effect of a multi-instrumentalist singer-songwriter looking for like-minded people, and influences, mid-period Bowie, XTC, and the Blue Nile, right? And,
right.
Because I was really into that Scottish band, the Blue Nile, at the time. It was just this like really kind of romantic, electronic, sparse, super emo, as they would say now. But the thing that's shocking is that I only got one call on a Bowie reference, and I feel like that was because Bowie hadn't yet gone away,
right?
And so people weren't going back to his catalog; they were still thinking of him as this Glass Spider thing, and the record before that with Blue Jean and all that stuff. And it was like, he's kind of like a middle-aged guy that wasn't making his best records, although I love those two records.
Right.
Well, I don't love the Glass Spider, but I love the one before that. And anyway, so yeah, I got the one call, and Roger came and met me, and he heard my songs, and he was like, man, you and this guy I'm working with, Andy, are my two favorite singer-songwriters.
Yeah.
And so about a year later, I got into 3 o'clock through that same damn paper,
right?
Recycler. I owe the Recycler a lot. And then Roger called me, and he's like, hey, remember the guy I told you about? Well, we're going to start our own band, and you're the guitar player if you want to do it. And I was like, well, I'm in the 3 o'clock now, man. And he's like, what? So, then another year passes, and then that band opens up for the 3 o'clock in San Jose, I think. And, so we had these conversations. So then I met Andy at that point, and we had some conversations, and then they flew down to talk to me, and I think Roger had some concerns that Andy and I might butt heads, because we're both really alpha people,
right?
And we did. He was right, and but that was the whole thing was like, hey man, we want a total democracy. We want everybody to. Andy was like, I know Roger's a big fan of your stuff. I haven't really heard it yet, but we want this to be a band. No solo bullshit.
Right.
And so you'll write songs and all this stuff. And so then I did it. So I was like, oh, well, this is great, because I love their songs. So let me add my songs, and then we're dynamite. And I moved to San Francisco and uprooted my life. And then every time I would bring a song in when we were doing the demos for Belly Button, they would say, it's great, but it's not right for this band. That's literally all they said in response to my songs. And so, I hit my head against that wall about 5 times before I stopped trying.
I think every Jellyfish fan, having anyone who's heard like the first couple of solo records, and I assume that some of the songs that were on, at least the first one, were songs that you were introducing to the band. I think anyone who hears those thinks in their head, I can totally see Jellyfish doing these songs. And if that's the case, there's 2 or 3 more Jellyfish albums worth of music for you.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was personal. It wasn't because it wasn't because the songs don't work. It was more like they wanted to to shield their little songwriting thing, and quite frankly, I'm sure it had something to do with publishing too, because they understood what publishing was when I didn't. I was the youngest one in the band. I'd had no experience. I mean, 3 O'Clock was like a weird experience where I wasn't even involved in any of the business stuff.
And that was a band that was almost, on its way to dissolving anyway by the time you got to it.
Yeah, exactly. They were going down the
right
down the sinkhole. But that's what happened with that. And when we finished the touring for the first record, I had a new girlfriend in LA, and I was just kind of like, in lockdown with her, and self-imposed lockdown, mind you. And then, because I've been in the other lockdown, and this was not that.
Right.
And then, they're calling me, hey, when you come back up to San Francisco, man, to weave your magic on the tracks. And I said, well, when are we going to do some of my songs? I got a bunch of new songs. And they're like, well, you know how we are. And I said, well, you know how I am. And here's my middle finger. You can't see it because we're on the phone, but
right.
It's erect. And,
it always seemed it always felt to me like it'd be like the Beatles, saying to George Harrison, okay, you know what, we'll listen to your Sunshine song in a minute. Right now, we're busy doing Maxwell's Silver Hammer for the 70th time. It just it always seems like here's a guy who's got songs that are every bit as good, if not better, than some of the songs that were produced for that first album. Second album's a different story. They went hog wild on that one. But as far as your involvement, I never understood that, and it just seemed to be, while they wanted to be a band and a democracy, it was anything but a band and a democracy.
Yeah, those were just words. They never wanted that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I discovered that. I discovered that as soon as I moved to San Francisco.
So you did your solo stuff. You formed a band with John Bryan and the Grays, which is such a great album. And I was reading in Craig Dorfman's book, Brighter Day, the Jellyfish Story, that there had been discussions about a second album with that band. Did that ever really materialize, or was that just early negotiation stuff?
No. What happened with that we toured for about 6 months on that record, and that was the irony is that however dysfunctional Jellyfish was, and it was pretty up there. The Grays was dare I say even more dysfunctional. It
really?
Yeah, we just had this. We had a very flawed concept to begin with, which was that we'd all had these negative experiences in bands with, fascist kind of dictator people in the band, and so we kind of over tons of whiskey and whatever else, we all determined that our whole thing was going to be like a real democracy. That word again,
right?
And we were going to. If it wasn't your song that we're working on, you're going to be the best damn sideman that ever existed. And when it's your song, you have complete control and can tell everybody what to play.
Right.
And that's how it's going to work. Well, a band with 4 generals is never going to work.
Right.
You have to have some people who are slightly subservient to the vision, to the visionaries. And I was absolutely I was exploding at that point with creativity and with sort of ideas and just sort of songs and just production styles that I was creating, I think.
Mm-hmm.
At least I felt that way. And the other guys kind of, they wanted to talk about everything and really, have a lot of open discussions and sit down and just discuss it. I'm just like, what? You guys, this place is like $200 an hour. Let's record music. And
music is no place to have feelings.
Exactly. I just remember I remember one of the guys. He'll remain unnamed. I remember him saying at one point, "I don't feel emotionally prepared to play the maraca right now."
Is there a lot of lead up to something like that?
Just the lack of communication and
right.
feeling slighted in some way by me, I guess, because I was, like I said, I was just like my engine was running on all 8 cylinders, and I was like in that studio just put up a track, and then I'll just record a bunch of stuff. I have a ton of ideas, and I helped Buddy immensely with his arrangements and playing about a lot of that stuff. And I helped the whole record. It was kind of it ended up kind of being my vision more than anybody else's, if you have to narrow it down. But that really upset John, because John had a different concept for the record. And God knows, maybe John's concept would have been a more commercially successful record. I have no idea, but that sound of that record was Jack Puig, who's a brilliant, recorder, and then me and Buddy, but a lot of that was just I was kind of steering that ship, and I had also just come out of being kind of I was a little bit traumatized from the whole Jellyfish experience, just because Andy and I, just our relationship was so dysfunctional. So I think that. In some ways, with this much hindsight, I feel like some of my behavior on that record, the making of that record, was a little bit maybe insensitive, because I was just, I'd come out from under the thumb of Andy and Roger, and I was like, no one is going to tell me what to do, because I've been told what to do now for 3 years, and screw that, and I'm like, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm going to prove it.
But then you go and start working on your own, solo records, and for the most part, it's a one-man show. You're playing every instrument. All the songs are yours. I mean, there are a couple of covers that you've done over the years. You did 2 albums worth of Beatles music, but between those first 3 solo records, I mean, how liberating must that have been, considering the experience you came from?
Oh, it was heaven. That first solo record, the first 2 solo records when I was on Elektra are I'm still having a very exciting life, but those were the most exciting times because, finally I was, doing it myself, which, is probably what I should have been doing the whole time. And it's kind of what I was doing the whole time. I was always recording at home, and I generally, not only me, but all my friends generally preferred my home recordings over the records like the Grays or even the Jellyfish stuff.
Right.
Everybody just, because I just had like a little bit more of it was a little bit more ramshackle and a little bit more like less controlled as those 2 records. And that's because that's who I am. I feel like people who create, if the who you are as a person really comes out in your art. And my whole thing is like, I like things that are at odds with each other. I like things that kind of fight for your attention. I don't like just a pop song where the snare drum and the vocal are the loudest things, because that's what sells records, all that crap, that all the formulaic stuff. Always just ignored that stuff. I don't care. I don't even want to know. And so that's where I think those first 2 records, especially the first one, the first record, I mean, there's things about it I would change, but for the most part, that's a very honest, time capsule of exactly where I was at that time. And I was super happy and super optimistic, and also thought, that I was maybe on the brink of having some commercial success, which would mean that I could not have to borrow money. And so,
right.
But that final thing was not true, but everything else was fantastic.
Well, both those albums, both Author Unknown and Can You Still Feel, critically, people loved them. Critics loved it, but critics don't necessarily put money in your pocket. That really, to a larger extent, falls into the hands of the record company that is promising to promote you. And it seems like one of the things, and you are not the only, far from the only one. I think Jellyfish had this problem. Maybe even the Grays did too. That there's, it's somewhat of a lopsided system. You in some respects, record companies pour on enough praise. They have deadlines, and in the end, the artist is expecting some help, and either they get it or they don't get it. And in case of those 2 records, they should have been a whole hell of a lot more commercially successful than they were. Artistically, no question. But with all that work, you're pouring your heart into it, were you disappointed by what eventually happened to those?
Oh, I was devastated. I was devastated because, I was devastated. I was devastated because Okay, so it's things I've learned from this. No record company, no company, no business is going to put more than the minimal amount of money into something that's slightly challenging or difficult to understand.
Right.
They're going to put the money into things that are simple and direct and easy to ingest and understand, easy to understand, because most people don't care about music the way I do, and so they're not going to sit down and like grapple with it, right? Just because they think, well, there's something in here that's good for me to know, so I'm gonna like give this thing like 50 listens. Like no one else does that, really. I mean, very few people. So it makes sense to me that while my music is has catchy elements to it, it definitely has some sort of classic definition of pop music, not the current one.
Right.
It has some of those elements to it, but it's also challenging, and that's that thing I was talking about earlier, where I like to have something pulling at. There's a little bit of a tug of war going on in my music, and it's it'll take you in places you're not expecting. It's not experimental music. It's not The Residents, that's for sure. But it's also not just this kind of like easy to digest thing with no depth.
Right.
There's a lot of depth in the music and the lyrical content, and I think that is why radio programmers. How do you expect a radio programmer to? I mean, college radio I did very well. I was like number one for like a month, CMJ. For my second record.
Well, I think the problem. I think the problem with radio, and I could probably speak to that. I've been in this for long enough. I think the problem with radio is that programmers are kind of limited in the same type of corporate structure that the record companies are, and it's probably even more restrictive.
Yes.
Because you are trying to appeal to the largest amount of audience in the least amount of time, and so to play songs that may be unfamiliar is somewhat of a risk, even if those songs are great. And I've seen that time and time again. It's certainly back in the 90s, where the things that motivated programmers to put music on the air weren't just courage, but sometimes other enticements from the record companies that were either legal or illegal. And it seems to it was a flawed system back then, and I think it's gotten more difficult as the years go on. So for a guy like you, when you're creating stuff on your own, and clearly if you listen to Jason Falkner's music, you understand there's a lot being poured out there. Yeah. When you're doing it now, and it's been a while since you've released a solo album of your own.
Sure have.
But the process of doing it, now it seems to be more about crowdsourcing or digital platform rather than the actual distribution of a disc or a record or something that someone can hold on to. It's a different world for a solo artist or even a band at this point. How do you kind of reconcile all that today?
Well, I mean, I haven't put out a record in 9 years, so I'm approaching like I'm approaching like the Blue Nile status there, where I think they put out 3 records in 25 years. So as far as the differences in promotion or whatever, the differences in just how people hear and listen to music now, it's been a while since I've done it, so I don't really know. None of that stuff is in my mind when I'm making the record. And I've been now, there is actually a record that I'm working on that I've been working on off and on for many, many years, and it's almost done, and I'll figure out how to get that out the best way when it's done. But I don't know. I mean, the self-promotion thing that's just rampant now, that just seems to be sort of one of those things that you file under a necessary evil or whatever. Most people don't even look at it as evil. I look at it as evil. I look at it as like, dude, if you're like over there like jumping up and down, waving your arms for me to pay attention to your damn song, and like I don't care. And that's a little cynical, but it's like everyone is doing it, and everyone has an equal voice now, which is cool. On some on one hand, it's great. It's great that everybody can promote themselves and actually, by word of mouth, have whatever they want to talk about, whether it be their pasta they just made or their new song.
But don't you think it's also a part of the kind of artist you want to be? You know, part of it is you are. When I see the stuff that you're doing now, the first thing that comes to mind is, here are these musical geniuses of the world who are saying, you know what, I want to play with Jason Falkner. Your reputation as an instrumentalist, as a songwriter, as a singer, all of that stuff, the journey you've taken has gotten you to the Oscars with Elton John, for crying out loud. I mean, I know those, like, they may be like one-off moments, but those are pretty spectacular moments.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, and I'm thankful for them, and I find it all pretty funny, actually. For me, when I'm totally honest, like, I don't get that much satisfaction out of playing with other people. I get the real, true soul satisfaction I get is making my own music,
right?
And that's why I kind of kick myself for taking so long between records. I deal with some sort of hopelessness at times about the whole thing. You know, I remember I think it was Rosanna Arquette was interviewing Joni Mitchell in some documentary, and Joni Mitchell was like, Rosanna's like, we need you. Like, what are you doing? Like, make a record. And she's like, I'm not gonna. Do you know how hard it is to make something, and then it's not the making of the thing, it's what you have to do after.
Right.
She's like, you have to do all these dances, and you have to agree to things, and she's like, I'm just not going to do it. And I remember thinking, because I'm a Joni fanatic, it's like, man, that's so sad. You know, I hope I'm never like that. And I'm not saying that that's how I feel, but I am acutely aware of the hurdles and the challenges and the potential disappointment. It's not disappointment because I'm not playing stadiums. I'm not unrealistic. It's
right.
just disappointment because it's so difficult to make a living doing this, and that's one of the reasons why I ended up going down the road of playing with other people. And you know, I'm very grateful that a friend like Beck, who is a friend first, I've known him since the late 90s.
Right.
You know, that he's such a fan and doesn't want me to jump ship. You know, I'm thankful for that, and I know that that's a sincere thing. And yeah, of course, playing with Paul McCartney was bonkers. I mean, that was one of the highlights of my life, without a doubt. I mean, like, maybe it's unparalleled. You know?
How did that come about? I assume that he was aware that you did, 2 albums of instrumental Beatles music before hiring you, or did that come after?
You assume incorrectly, my friend.
He didn't know?
He did not know those records. So what happened was this. That was through my friend Nigel, who had co-produced my Can You Still Feel? And Nigel was producing Paul. And Nigel called me one day and said, hey, so I'm producing Paul McCartney, and you want to be involved? And I'm like, let me think about that. Yes. And he goes, I don't really love his band, so I want to put my own band together, and so you would be on guitar and piano and whatever is needed, because you can play everything. And then it would be James Gadsden on drums and Joey Warner on drums as well. So like splitting that up between the two of them.
Right.
And it would just be like 3 of you in the room at once, just kind of working on his stuff. And his whole idea was to have Paul eventually, overdub some of the stuff that even some of the other guys, with myself included, were playing. So because he wanted Paul to kind of play everything like the first McCartney record and all that stuff. So, which I totally, of course, understand. Back that 100%. So, but yeah, no, when I went in there, it's just I showed up and he's not there yet, and I'm like checking all my gear, and I'm realizing, wait, I'm like really unprofessional because I don't even know, like, I don't have a pedal board. Like my pedals are all just kind of loose.
Right.
And then I'm like, I have really nice amps and stuff, but I maybe hadn't turned this one on in a year, so I didn't even know if my amp worked. And I'm like, oh my God, maybe I should check my amp to see if that works before I start recording with Paul McCartney. And and it worked, thank God. And then I'm like down there like fidgeting with my pedals, and then I just hear somebody goes, "You must be Jason," and I'm like, and I look up and it's Paul McCartney, and I was totally, I'd prepared myself. I'm like, I know what I'm doing here. I know who's coming here.
Right, but how do you prepare?
As soon as he was standing right in front of me, my legs did that rubber thing that I've heard about, but I had never experienced. And I was like about to fall over. I was just like, and I mean, he's the sweetest guy in the world. He totally makes you comfortable. He doesn't use his McCartney insane power to intimidate or anything. He's very lovable guy.
He must know at this point, because he's made so many records and with so many different people, that he's Paul McCartney, and the reaction to people meeting him for the first time must run the gamut from everything from insane to disinterest in some cases.
Well, that's right, and that's what I've been saying this whole time. It's like it's got to be a very strange existence to be so acutely aware that everyone who's talking to you is like biting the inside of their cheek, because they're like, "Holy shit, that's Paul McCartney!" Sorry if I can't say a bad word, but so there's that. But yeah, so I finally, like 2 or 3 days into recording, I had the Bedtime with the Beatles CDs in my pocket. I had the pink one for his baby daughter Beatrice,
right,
and the blue one for him. And we finished the take, and he put his arm around my shoulder. We walked into the control. He's like, "Sounds great," and I'm like, "Oh man." I said, "Have you ever?" And I was like, "Have you ever heard these?" I whipped out these 2 CDs, and he's like, "Oh no!" And his reaction was like, "Oh God, here we go." Like, imagine how often that happens. And we listened back to what we had done, and he was sitting in the chair, and I was kind of like, I had my arms on the back of the chair behind him, and he opens it up while we're listening, and he pulls out the artwork, and there's a picture of me at the piano holding an apple by the core.
Right.
And he goes, "Cheeky, that's cheeky." And I was like, "Well, yes, it is. I agree." And then I didn't see him for about 5 days. I came back in to pick up my gear for a solo show I had. And he proceeded to blow my mind. He was doing a tambourine track. He's like, "Jace, wait, can you wait? I want to talk to you." Back in, listens to his tambourine track, and he turns around in the chair and he goes, "I'm flattered that you made this record." He goes, "I listened to the whole thing. Me and my mates, we had a little bit of wine, and we listened to the whole record." He said, "It's amazing. He said, I was expecting not to like it. It's amazing." He goes, "The little fool on the hill thing that you did right before the Calliope section, it sounds like Bill Evans, man." And I'm
wow.
And I'm like, because the truth of the matter is, a few years earlier when I was recording that record in the same studio that we were in, I did that. I changed the chords to a Beatles song. I just took some wild liberties, and I did that little turnaround, and I made it swing. And I changed the chords. I made them slightly more complicated. And I remember thinking to myself, "That sounds like Bill Evans." And when he said, "That thing sounds like Bill Evans," I was like, "Holy crap!" Like, he really listened to it.
And he saw exactly what you saw. That's awesome.
Yeah, that is message received right there.
Absolutely. There's a couple
that blew my mind.
There's a couple other things I want to mention. 2017, you produced an album for one of my favorites, Thomas Walsh and Pugwash.
I really loved Thomas, and we'd been acquaintances, and it's like sort of peripheral friends for a couple of decades, I guess. And that record is very bittersweet to me, because I agree with you objectively. I listened to that record, and I think I'm so proud of it. Like, I couldn't believe how much I sunk my teeth into it and put so much into that record. And, he was over the moon with it when we were making it. I was over the moon with it. And I was listening to that record, after I finished mixing it. And I'm like, this is like by far one of the best things I've ever produced.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about is, you like I said earlier, you played at the Oscars with Elton John. Now, over the years, I've exposed my kids to all kinds of music, and your music, Jellyfish, XTC, my kids are way into it. So, my oldest daughter is away at college, She's 20 years old, and I find out Facebook or social media that you are going to be playing with Elton John that night. And I texted her and I said, make sure you're watching the Oscars tonight. Elton John is playing with Jason Falkner. And she says,
I like that wording.
yeah, right. It's not the other way around. We're bigger fans of Jason Falkner than we are of Elton John. You got a lot more going on than Elton John ever did. But her first reaction is, and only a Jason Falkner fan would probably get this other than you. Her first reaction is, well, Jason Falkner's moving up. And I'm like, there you go. There's a smart 20-year-old girl. And then she texts me later on after the performance is done, and her reaction is, boy, Elton John's kind of hogging the camera tonight, don't you think? I just thought.
Classic.
So
that's amazing. I love it.
I know playing with other people is not your favorite, but over the years, between Beck and some of your other projects, TVIs and the Logan's Logan soundtrack, Sanctuary. Thank you. You have also maintained or rekindled a friendship and a working relationship with Roger Manning. How has that gone over the years between the two of you?
It's I mean, the Logan Sanctuary thing happened because, TVIs happened because of Logan Sanctuary.
Right.
I was friendly with Brian Reitzel, who was in Red Cross, and Brian and I were in Air together. And Brian and Roger got a hold of me to come in and sing on this phony soundtrack to this non-existent sequel to Logan's Run. I was like, well, that's a really funny idea. I'm in. But we were in the parking lot after doing that. I sang on a couple songs and played some shredding, 70s, bad funk guitar on that. And we're in the parking lot, and we were like, that was so fun. And Roger and I were like, wow, that was cool. We hadn't done anything together since Jellyfish.
Right.
And we were just kind of like, we should do something else. Maybe we should do some funny, some weird record or something. And I just was like, yeah, well, that actually was a lot of fun. It's fun to do something. When you've been working by yourself and kind of just playing in your sandbox by yourself for a long time, and then you go and it's with people that and that have similar musical concepts, it's very satisfying. And so that post recording of Logan Sanctuary little summit that we had in the parking lot was the beginning of TVIs, and that was something that took years to make. And unfortunately, it sounds like it took years to make, but we just labored over that thing. It was going to be more of a jokey, along the lines of the Logan Sanctuary thing.
Right.
It was going to be probably more of a comedic nod to early 80s production and all that stuff. And then I said to myself and out loud, I'm not going to be involved in something that's like a joke. I want if we're going to do this, let's I'll write these songs because I have just so many songs pouring out of me. And so, Roger and I came up with all the basic riff things, some of the riffs that are kind of like Two Boy Army, Gary Newman stuff. They're almost like guitar riffs played on a synth.
Yeah, well, that's that's what I think is so amazing about this record. Is it as the concept initially was kind of a jokey thing.
The concept was
the songs are terrific, and Mission Submissions does sound just like metal from Gary Newman. It's that's such a great. And the whole album is filled with just great hooks, and the arrangements are good. It's this was an album that should have been out 15 years before it was.
Well, yeah, we were way ahead of our time with that record, to be honest with you. I mean, there was no Interpol, there was no Strokes, there were no Killers when we made that record. That was that was way ahead of that curve.
Yeah,
and we only played about 3 shows, but we spent months making these crazy movies that were projected onto us that were all of the material in the movies was from Roger and my crazy VHS public access collections of just inane stuff, just crazy weird footage of things. We didn't use any big stars because we didn't get sued, so it's all just cut but they tell a story. They tell the story of the song. I basically directed those movies, and Roger like mastered Final Cut in like a week, and we just like made these movies. We spent like 3 months on them, only to play 2 shows with him. And I mean, the whole thing is like it's like a Thompson Twins version of Spinal Tap. We just spent all of this energy and time, and then just kind of like didn't do anything with it. And I do think it's kind of funny. At the time, it was sort of another brick in the wall as far as like things to let you down, you know. But
right.
In retrospect, it's hilarious. And you know, when that finally came out, it came out in Japan. Maybe I'm thinking it was 2009. Maybe it came out in Japan, even though we made it in 2000 and 2001. And so it came out many years after it was made. And then it came out many, many years after that initial release on Omnivore, when they did a real nice job with the double LP. And yeah, I'm super proud of that record. Like I agree. I mean, I think that record I think there's songs on that record that would be like huge, like club hits, like the Need to Love. And the idea of me having a club hit is one of the most satisfying things I can think of.
And
I just think that would be the funniest thing.
And singing a falsetto too, which you haven't done a whole hell of a lot either.
Yeah, I'm like singing like Jimmy Somerville or something. It's hilarious.
Yeah. I really appreciate you taking some time to talk to me tonight. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
And that's it. That's my interview with the great Jason Falkner. You can check out our other podcast on Apple Podcast, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Spotify. Make sure you check out Backseat's Musical Fun Bag Facebook page and Instagram. We'll see you next week.